Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I am Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction. Who are we and what are we doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Gia. Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of substance abuse, rape, physical violence, destruction of property, prejudice against AIDS victims, and emotional abuse.
That about covers it. Some of the sources we used to inform our opinions and insights on Gia include Thing of Beauty, The Tragedy of Supermodel Gia by Stephen Freed, Model, The Ugly Business of Beautiful Women by Michael Gross, and an episode of a podcast I love called The C Word, hosted by Lena Dunham and Alyssa Bennett, about Gia. From our friends at Wikipedia, here's a little bit of background about Gia Marie Carangi, who was born January 29th, 1960, died November 18th, 1986. She was an American model considered by many to be the first supermodel. She was featured on the cover of numerous magazines, including multiple editions of Vogue and Cosmopolitan, and appeared in advertising campaigns for fashion houses, including Armani, Dior, Versace, and Yves Saint Laurent. Gia, the movie, is a 1998 American biographical drama television film about the life and times of one of the first supermodels, Gia Carangi. The film stars Angelina Jolie as Gia and Faye Dunaway as Wilhelmina Cooper, with Mercedes Ruehl and Elizabeth Mitchell. It was directed by Michael Cristofer and written by Cristofer and Jay McInerney. The original music score was composed by Terence Blanchard, and the film premiered on January 31st, 1998 on HBO. Gia received positive reviews from critics and received numerous awards for Angelina Jolie's performance in particular, and has an aggregate rating on Rotten Tomatoes of 93% of the 15 critics giving it a positive review, with a rating average of 7 out of 10, whatever that means.
Our reactions to this were slightly different. I found it neutrally mediocre with a few worthwhile points and a number of things that annoyed me. You had much stronger feelings.
I got a lot of problems with this movie. A lot. I hated this. I hated this movie from the jump. It is such a nothing of a movie. So, we open with finding out that Gia was a top supermodel of the 1970s and 1980s. She was distinctive looking in that everyone at the time was very blonde and thin-lipped. In the opening of this film, which is shot like faux documentary style, where they're clipping interviews from people talking about their times with Gia, we hear from everyone except Gia, which is a through line of this film. We never really hear much from her. So we're always looking at her from this external gaze that the feminist in me says is a very male gaze, because Jay McInerney.
Oh, the guy who used second person as a gimmick, and that's what he's famous for. I know there are the talking heads opening. There's everybody having opinions about Gia, noted that this was Angelina Jolie's star-making role, and it starts with makeup being applied to her face that you don't realize until the end. Spoilers, we forgot the spoiler warning, and we're going to spoil everything. It's her corpse. They're putting makeup on her corpse. You find that out at the end. And one of the things that I disliked the most is the use of composite characters, where this was one of the things that hurt Bessie. It was when you combine people in someone's life, or you can't get the rights to a person's story and you create a composite, you're putting that actor at a disadvantage, because other people in the biopic have a real person where if they're alive, they can possibly talk to them, or they can look at material about them. But with a composite, they're whatever you want to be, and there's a lack of authenticity that you feel. And the thing is, composite characters are unnecessary. Milk proves it. If you ever get to Mrs. Parker and the Vicious Circle, they cast some guy as Harpo Marx hanging out at a party in the background for 30 seconds, and you know what? It added to it. Would Sandy Linter not let them use her name? That was Gia's girlfriend, who the girlfriend character that they show is mostly based on, because she's certainly spoken publicly about it since, posting pictures of them together on Instagram. Composite characters are unnecessary, and they hurt whatever picture they're in, and a decent screenwriter can efficiently make those multiples real or hone in on one.
I agree with you, and in theory, composite characters can work if they are well written and well directed, and well acted. And somewhere in the mix of all of this, some side of that pyramid fell down. Whether it's limited acting, lack of direction, or they just weren't well written. And I hated this movie. But this is just got model agency owner pastiche and model pastiche and just nothing, archetypes that stand in for people, and they do nothing, they serve nothing. I don't hate this format. The faux documentary interview style can be really effective. My favorite biopic ever that I've mentioned, Star 80, is full of this format. And Bob Fosse, because Bob Fosse did a lot of things right, did this extraordinarily well with that screenplay and with that story. We have her diary entries and poems, which I'm going to call them facile. And I'm calling them that because she wrote them when she was a teenager, and they're barely concealed allegorical fairy tales. And we're told right away that models don't have voices. So that's kind of woven into this. And I would say this film was working on a meta level by stripping her of her voice, but I'm not about to give it that kind of credit. I think that's just a mistake. So we already lack a really strong character whose motivations we understand at the center of this. And that is unsustainable.
Well, I feel like you own this episode because you had a much stronger reaction to Gia than I did. I didn't hate it. I shared some of your objections to it, particularly around wardrobe and failed opportunities to own its time and place. But I merely felt kind of meh about it, just average. One thing I wanted to note around the significance of Gia was that Cindy Crawford, whose face dominated starting about 3 or 4 years after Gia disappeared, got big because she reminded people of Gia. She was referred to as baby Gia in fashion circles. That look was still something people wanted.
And I'm about to just throw down my first major controversial thought that I'm going to share. This was a star-making role for Angelina Jolie, who was in the midst of just a meteoric rise in the entertainment industry when this came out. I don't think she's the greatest actress. She is a star. She is good in things, but she's not an amazing actor. And this movie doesn't do a lot of service to giving her the opportunity to show any dimensions beyond a 9 out of 10 of crazy. I don't think that she's that good in this because, again, I don't feel like there's a strong hand directing it. The writing isn't strong. The production isn't strong. So we open on she was born and raised in Philadelphia, something you and I know because we read source material, not from this movie, because this movie does literally nothing at any point to show us where we are and when we are.
So as the child of Philadelphians, I did note that as a teenager, she is shown working in her dad's cheesesteak place. That's mostly because I'd read that she was from Philadelphia. You hear a little bit of the Rocky accent, but my parents are from Germantown and Wynwood. I grew up thinking that accent was a fake thing that they invented for Rocky. One thing they did get right was The casting of baby Mila Kunis as the younger Gia is so seamless, and she like blends so seamlessly that I actually thought, oh, wow, they made Angelina look 14. Mercedes Ruehl has a weird way of talking that worked when she was playing the developmentally disabled aunt in Lost in Yonkers. It worked for the aunt. It didn't. I don't know how I felt about it here.
She looks a lot like Gia's mother, and I suspect that she also sounds a lot like Gia's mother. But, you know, again, with the show us where we are and when we are, she has her hair from the movie Big when she played Josh Baskin's mother in 1989. She looks like she just looked around and she's like, I'll be in your movie. I am not changing my hair. I am not taking it out of this banana clip. And you're going to have to deal with that. It's the 70s, but there's literally no indication that it's the 70s. And I agree with you. Baby Mila Kunis is outstanding casting, and she does a good job of showing kind of the hurt and showing the impression that all of the bad things that were happening in her household. She leaves an impression in the film. You can kind of tell that she's on her way to bigger things at some point in her career.
So an issue I had was that they make out that teenage Gia is a punk, but that was not her subculture. She was a Bowie kid. And I think whoever was making this was thinking, oh, that was a British thing. It's going to be unrelatable and too esoteric for American audiences. So let's just make her a punk. When those are very different subcultures, part of the reason we picked Gia for Pride Month was because Gia Carangi was a lesbian, practically almost what they now call a gold star lesbian, which means someone who's only slept with women. Part of the appeal of Bowie was that, like, that subculture was open to that. Like, punk didn't have so much to do with it. So that oversimplification takes a lot away. When you assume that the audience is dumb, you always weaken your material. Even if the specifics around authenticity aren't someone's and they aren't something people know about, people still feel a richness of specificity when they see it that does make sense, even if it's a thing they're unfamiliar with. So points off to the movie for simplifying the subculture.
It would have worked out okay in this movie if she was dressing like thin white Duke era David Bowie. It would have been okay.
Mm-hmm.
People would have clocked it and it would have been fine. She meets this pastiche of a human named TJ who takes her from wherever the hell she lives, which is Philadelphia, to New York. I guess it's New York. We see some places that look vaguely like the East Village. You know, she just says to this guy, as if it's an insight about her character, you scare the shit out of people, and then they don't see how scared you are. And that's about as deep as we get with her. And that's something that I bet you could get any 17-year-old on the street to say today.
She meets TJ Pastiche. They are picked up by a couple of swingers who do a photo shoot. We know that it's the woman who interests her, and we see her sending the photos off in an envelope, which leads to her walking into Wilhelmina Models, where she carves her name on the desk with a knife.
She loves that knife. The woman in this scene, I was lying over how this woman was styled, because she was straight out of like the Lyndon B. Johnson family White House. Like, also, as the daughter of a photographer, I was watching the photography style that they were using, the way that they were posing and he was clicking away. And I was like, all of these photos are trash. None of them are coming out. Gia is, I guess, you know, based on my watching this, like the perspective they take on her mental health is the very paternalistic diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. So she's, you know, desperate for her mother's love and approval, and her mother abandoned her. And we don't understand why she's attracted to masculine archetypes, and they don't really bother to tell us, except we see her try on TJ Pastiche's men's briefs at one point, and that's pretty much the extent to which we explore why she was attracted to that. And it's alleged that she was sexually abused by both her father and by her stepfather. And there's a possibility that the fact that she was injured by men and saw them as being very powerful and having hand over everyone around her could have lent itself to her attraction to the stylings of traditional masculinity. And this movie could show us that if they felt like it, but they don't. They only care about showing me Angelina Jolie naked and crazy.
We do see a bit of her naked. On the age thing, flagging that, it's crazy to me how young she was. And she is not in high school, which is where a 17-year-old girl ought to be. She's, I think, 17 when they show her heading off to the city. Like, she died at 26.
She's mind-bogglingly young. And I don't feel like we ever know how old she is either. Like, when her career is starting, we don't ever really have a good sense of that because, to your point, we don't see her in school. We don't hear about what is going, like whether or not she's had an education. You also think about how immature she was and, the things that she was, interested in. Like, it also adds a sense of understanding why she acted out the way that she did as well. There's just a lot of information that they leave on the table that explains her in a much kinder way that is just sort of like brushed aside. So she can just have outbursts that kind of go unexplained, except, oh my gosh, she's crazy.
Speaking of left on the table, there are two things. So first, that she goes to meet Wilhelmina Cooper, who's played by Faye Dunaway. Now, you noted that Faye Dunaway is 56 here, so it's been over 30 years since Bonnie and Clyde and about a quarter century since Chinatown. And I guess Wilhelmina Cooper died at 40, you mentioned. I felt like men get cast in roles they're 16 years too old for all the time, and I kind of just enjoyed watching Faye Dunaway do the Faye Dunaway thing. I have no idea whether it had any relation to the real Wilhelmina Cooper. But since we're about to send her off on first photo shoot, the fashion in this is a missed opportunity. And I had said, well, I had wanted to cut it some slack, saying, well, often when there's that 20-year point in the cycle, that's right before things become chic again. They were too nervous to approach the 70s directly, but it's supposed to be the 70s, and I never saw a bell-bottom once, I think. Like, even, I don't know, were fashion people jumping the gun on getting rid of the bell-bottom early? Or were they embarrassed to deal with the 70s more? And then you pointed out that Dazed and Confused came out sooner than that. Boogie Nights came out the same year. And not only do they not handle the time and place, it's also, I should be awed by the fashion in this. It's about the world's top model in an era that is incredibly visually evocative. I see nothing that reminds me of that. There's this one red dress that she ruins, but it's more that it was the only thing where they were trying.
I was, as you know, furious about the fashion, because the fashion of the late 70s, like, it could be another character in this film. It forms the decadence and the fatalism of the era. It's Halston and it's Terry Mugler and it's Calvin Klein, and it should be shiny and beautiful and weird and kind of like playing another role in the extremism and the danger of the time period. And it would be another way to put Gia in a place and a time context. I know they have budget constraints, but it's such a miss to me. And I feel like not only was it, Goodfellas, Casino, Dazed and Confused, Boogie Nights, all 70s films. Earlier in the decade, you had groups like Delight and Red Cross wearing 1970s fashion and 1970s styles. It wasn't unachievable to get your hands on stuff or make it or rent it or whatever. If you can't get the fashion, don't bother making a movie. Make another thing where you show me Angelina Jolie's nipples. It doesn't have to be this, because this just becomes sort of like a very, very sad movie about the rise and fall of, and this isn't how I think of Gia, but the way that they play her in the film, rise and fall of an unstable junkie. Like, it doesn't matter what industry she's in. To your point about Faye, like, yes, I did point out there is kind of a big age gap there. I don't actually care that much because I love her and I'm happy to see her in anything. I was super psyched to see her because she looks amazing in this movie. So I bought it. I just noticed that it was a pretty dramatic age difference. I love at this point that she's going to her first photo shoot and she calls Wilhelmina up in the middle of the night, and Wilhelmina asks her if she did her colonic and then tells her to take a half of a Nebutal. The most 70s advice ever.
Goes on her first shoot. I know that they did have tab soda around instead of Diet Coke. And so someone bothered to create a can of Tab in 1997. And this is the only bit of apparent effort at period-specific authenticity stuck out. And she meets Linda, who is mostly based on the makeup artist Sandy Linter, but for some reason we are stuck with the pastiche character.
Linda looks like she just stepped off of a Newport News catalog shoot, if you ever got that catalog in your house growing up. It was clothing for the mature woman in her 40s. Everything she wears, her hair, her makeup, she's got a side part, for Pete's sake. They didn't even bother.
This photographer, after they're done shooting the clothes, he's like, let's make art, which means the models take off their clothes. So the other two models leave, and Gia says, I'll stay if Linda stays.
Linda stays. Angelina gets buck naked and they're posing behind a fence. This is a real photo shoot that happened. And the photographer is a real person, Chris von Wagenheim. And he looks like, in my notes, I said he looks like Freddie Prinze Jr. wearing a Sebastian Bach wig. The less said, the better. So they take their clothes off. She's throwing herself against the fence. We're seeing tons of nipple. And they're posing, and it gets all arty and black and white of them posing together, and then they hook up.
Gia is part of the very beginning of HBO's dominance in prestige drama. So in 1998, when it comes out, that's around the start of The Sopranos and Sex and the City, and HBO's prestige series, like their precursor to it was Oz, which also had Edie Falco. But it's the very beginning of that. And this sort of gets, it's respected critically. It sort of gets rolled into that, but it doesn't hold up to what they'd accomplish later.
No, and I have to note, they do not have Boardwalk Empire budgets for these costumes. I get it. They don't have Boardwalk Empire money for the sets. They don't have, the technical things that we have today that can make a crowd look bigger on a computer and things like that. But at the same time, if you can't do the work to make this look even a little bit good, don't bother. Like, it's a really ugly movie to look at. It's shot ugly. It looks like that first episode of Sex and the City where things are like muddy and kind of out of focus, and the lighting's terrible, and when the lighting is good, people look terrible. Like it's really unappealing to look at this movie. And then we get what everybody came here for, which is the Skinamax love scene between Linda and Gia. And I have a note here that I am seeing a lot of nipples, and for what? Just a question I'm always asking myself. She finds out that Linda has a boyfriend. I have no reason here either to understand why they like each other. These two do not have good chemistry between them. I don't feel like they're attracted to each other. And the interviews with Linda don't do much to push along like why she was attracted to Gia, or sell me on the idea that they actually liked each other.
Angelina at that age does have the goods to sell you on that she has the body of the world's future top supermodel. She spots Linda leaving and chases her out into the hallway naked just to show, oh, look, she's crazy when the elevator door opens, and she doesn't care. And yeah, we see her hanging out with her surrogate mama, Wilhelmina, who tells her you're in for the ride of your life, and then cut to what they say is Studio 54.
Oh my God. The number of things in this sequence that made me concurrently furious. The song Dancing with Myself is playing. This song came out after Studio 54 closed in 1980, after Wilhelmina's death. There's no reason for this song to be playing, and yet here we are with a lazy ass needle drop. There's all this like gratuitous sexual activity going on around her for the sake of it. There's a ripoff Mark Benecke, the child doorman at Studio 54. He was like 17 or 19, and he was the one out there picking people, and he was a child. Like, they don't even get that right. I was furious. And then we see more photo shoots of her and a montage of her becoming a huge model. At this point, you may note that they don't even bother to cover up Angelina Jolie's giant dragon tattoo on her arm, which is not at all something that Gia had. Like, get some makeup, get a sleeve. You don't care about the fashion anyway. Just put her in a puffy sleeve or whatever. Doesn't matter. Nobody cares what time it is. And cover that shit up. So, you know, we're seeing in all of this, like, how codependent Gia is on her own mother, on Wilhelmina, even on Linda. She's kind of a little bit looking to be mothered by her. Then she does heroin for the first time, and she fantasizes about talking to each of them about all of her ideas. And yeah, she's on heroin now.
Great. She buys a car and goes to Philadelphia with Linda and shows her mother herself on the cover of Vogue, which would not happen for another few years. Her mom wants to know if she has a boyfriend. They act as if they never talked in the years in between, and that wasn't really true. And she keeps sending Linda yellow roses. Linda is living with her boyfriend, Billy. And she comes and confronts them when they're on their way back from a night out on the town.
We, from this point, just move from dramatic tantrum to dramatic tantrum without getting inside any of it. There's a lot of crazy stories about Gia's behavior on the sets of photo shoots, her sneaking away from the photo shoots, her washing off her makeup, her being very unkind to other models and calling them ugly, and just being really incredibly unprofessional. Again, she's a child who is being given an awful lot of power and agency that she's not necessarily prepared to take on. But we don't really see much of this. We hear it in voiceovers as she's getting booked for things, but she has, you know, she just keeps like having these like eruptive moments where she freaks out on someone and she starts yelling, and it's all, you know, it's all just for what? Like, she's unstable, in quotes.
This is what happens when you give a teenager a ton of money with no supervision. And I do think like the parents are kind of awful because if anyone cared about her, they'd been telling her to put that aside, or she has no guidance from anyone around her. There's a shoot with someone who appears to be Scavulo, and people keep going away from her, and he tries to give her some useful advice that she's like too young to process. And Wilhelmina gets sick.
Wilhelmina getting sick is really, really destabilizing for Gia. You know, she doesn't even seem to really understand that Wilhelmina is dying. We have an interaction with Mike Mansfield, pastiche model agent extraordinaire, who tries to recruit her to his agency, and she just starts yelling at him to say, like, she would never leave Wilhelmina. And then Wilhelmina dies.
And then we have the scene you were worried about me over with the big red dress. I didn't get as upset as you would have thought that I would have, where they destroy a couture dress, because it didn't look as impressive as it should have. And it's like the only thing in the movie that tries to look impressive.
She's posing in this shoot in this red dress that is supposed to look like couture. She's clearly quite high or coming down. I'm not sure which. She's in a drug cycle. And again, we're seeing this being shot in such a way where I'm like, none of these photos are going to come out. Don't bother with what you're doing. Like, no one's holding still for the shot. And she decides she's just going to leave this photo shoot. So she gets on the back of a motorcycle with a guy. We have another insanely like misappropriated needle drop with Echo and the Bunnymen's Killing Moon, which didn't come out until 1984.
And here was the thing you knew I was going to get mad over. Her dealer isn't there for her to buy heroin from so that she can stick to the thing of like, no, I only snort it or smoke it. That makes it okay for her. So some frickin' junkie rips the sleeve of the dress. Since all of the fashion in this was about 60% tops of what it should have been, I did not get quite as upset as you would have thought I would get.
Yeah. I thought the principle might bother you. So yeah, she shows up at Linda's covered in blood and in this ripped dress, and she decides that she's going to move home and starts a methadone program, and it doesn't go well because she's trying to follow this protocol, and she calls Linda's house, and the boyfriend who she was supposed to have broken up with picks up.
They do show that Billy, Linda's ex-boyfriend, had just come to get his stuff. Like, you see him throwing some lightweight item into a box, which makes me feel like, had he just moved out? He sounds kind of bitter, but if he's coming back like months later, you don't really have a sense of the passage of time here. Why does she need to go to Philadelphia for methadone treatment?
I'm pretty sure they have methadone in New York City. She goes back into New York City because she wants to start working again as a model. She wants to get out of Philadelphia. And she goes back and she signs with Mike Pastiche, the modeling agent we met earlier. He wants her to do a TV interview where she talks about how she's now clean and sober. This is a real thing that happened to Gia, and you can watch the video, and she is fucked up in this video. It's pretty disturbing to watch. And Jolie plays this really well, and she's clearly, acting high, and Linda catches her doing drugs in the bathroom. And she and Linda have a big fight. And the thing that I made a note that I assume is said at the end of every breakup Leonardo DiCaprio has, every time he dumps a woman, she's going to start screaming, "You just want to say I'm fucking a model," which is what Gia accuses Linda of saying.
Linda doesn't seem like that. Linda doesn't seem like much of anything.
Linda looks like she should be driving a minivan. Like, yeah. I've seen Linda at soccer games.
Yeah, I had a note here where I wrote down, how is a makeup artist able to afford an apartment this big? Oh, right, it's the 70s. And then you see Gia on the runway throwing some tulle around, and everything starts to spin. She shoots up under the gloves. There's an abscess on her hand. It's gross. The photographer, who appears to be Scavullo, requests her for one more shoot, and this was supposed to be part of her comeback. They recreate sort of a Cosmo cover where her arms are behind her back. You can Google that Cosmo cover. It was her last cover, and it was sort of Scavullo's gift to her. It's a very sad scene, and she's upset that they're trying to take her knife away. I don't know if it's the same knife that she carved on the desk with.
No, and I know I've been kicking the crap out of this movie for its lack of, connection with anything relating to the fashion of the time. They actually come pretty close to recreating this cover in terms of the look of it and the dress that she's wearing and everything. So I'm gonna give them that. Things start to get more abject for her. She's doing catalog work in Germany, and she's nodding off on the set while they're styling her. Like, she's passing out. She's in really bad shape.
Yeah, and TJ Pastiche comes to her apartment where the door is open. She has no money. She cuts him with a knife after tearing around the apartment. He takes her to a rehab where she has to declare herself indigent. She sweats it out. There's a woman telling her off in the group. She gets some kind of bob haircut here, and I don't understand why. She calls Linda to apologize. She gets a job at what appears to be the Gap. And they're really rushing through. And I don't know if it was something that was just too much for the writer to write. But in real life, Leah tried to get clean a bunch of times. And toward the end, she was a prostitute in Atlantic City for at least a couple years. And when they write about the condition that she was in the final years of her life, it's much worse than anything you see here, which I get would be very hard to look at.
She's having Christmas with her mom, and she's starting to feel ill, and she finds out that she has AIDS. This is in that era where they really didn't know anything from anything with AIDS, so she is put in isolation.
They show people in spacesuits. TJ visits her. He's more upset than she is. The mom won't take her back to the house. You see her putting makeup on over the lesions and going to see Linda one last time. One thing that was a little bit touching to me here was you see her saying, "Oh, you don't need a husband to have kids," and you kind of see how 10 years later, this would be a lesbian couple actually making plans. But she knows it's the last time that she's going to see this woman that they had set up as the great love of her life, because they're lazy script writers and went with a pastiche.
She goes to Linda and she lies about her health and her condition. It's pretty dark. She collects a bunch of money and she goes to score, and she gets beaten up by the drug dealer, and all of her money gets taken.
She wants to get enough to overdose, I think, so that she doesn't have to endure the humiliation of what the final months would be like. I think she said, "I'm going to see Linda one last time, and then I'm going to die before I have to deal with this getting any worse." But the amount of drugs that she's trying to buy, I think she wants to start dealing. There's a rape scene. She's taken to the hospital. There is blood all over the place. The mom arrives. The dad comes to see her while she's out of it, and she's sitting around watching old silent movies with the mom. She seems mildly happy because she finally has all the attention she's ever wanted from the mom. My next notes are forgiveness, blood everywhere, dead.
We cut back to that opening where they were making her up for her funeral.
Stands up and, oh gosh, in the afterlife you get to be beautiful again. But actually, Gia Carangi was one of the first women to die of AIDS before anyone even really knew what it was. It was 1986, and hardly any woman had had it yet.
It's a sad death, but I'm also, I'm like, why did you even make this? What am I supposed to be taking away from this besides this woman who was crazy, and then she did drugs, and then she died?
I'm afraid I was rather unkind about the little fairy tales from her journal, where I called it pseudo-profound. So I guess our next step is choice dialogue. I'm assuming you didn't have any, but correct me on this one.
I'm furious at this film. I am convinced that dark money flowed in to create create like a producer's like film so we could just get Angelina Jolie naked on camera. I'm not convinced that anyone really wanted this movie to be made, and certainly didn't put any heart into making it.
So I did find a few pieces where they said, the more you are of the moment, the faster you become of the past, which sounds like a cliche, but I could relate to this. I've never cared remotely about the moment. A piece of dialogue between Gia and Linda. You don't have any clothes on. Don't change the subject. Something she says to Suda Scavulo, unless it really was supposed to be Scavulo. I should have been a rock star, but I can't sing. And then something that one of the fashion people says at Willie's funeral. The great thing about the afterlife is that nobody cares how you look. And then finally, something the mom says to her, I hate what this methadone is doing to your shoulders.
The movie tells us a bunch of things, but then gives us no backup on them, and it makes it ultimately toothless. Like that comment, that's dangerously close to being trenchant observation about what it means to be a model and about how quickly you're over and everything. And I feel like there's a lot of things that they could have observed and dug into that they just didn't, that they kind of just glossed over with these faux deep interviews that really don't do anything to push the narrative forward or bring us anywhere, or illustrate Gia beyond like, look how fucking crazy she was. She was crazy. So let's do our rankings. Outward appearances, makeup, and hair, 3.
I gave it a 6. Acting and casting, I gave it a 6. I enjoyed Faye Dunaway. I don't think anyone in this is a bad actor. I think a number of actors were ill-served by playing pastiche characters where the inauthenticity made them ciphers who we never cared about.
For acting and casting, I gave it a 4. And she's good, I guess. And to your point about the pastiche cipher characters, I don't even know how to judge them because so many of them are not real. Mila Kunis was good, and Faye Dunaway is always good. And I guess she was, and Angelina Jolie, she was fine with the material that she had to work with.
For passage of time, I gave it a 4. We don't know when we are. We have little notion of how much time is going by. And we don't know how we wound up in 1986 if we're ever told that we're there.
I gave passage of time a 2. The only reason I gave it a 2 is because of the Mila Kunis casting. Otherwise, this movie epically fails in every single way that it can to tell us anything about when we are. Often there's no indication of even where we are. We're never given a sense of how long it's been between things. It's a nightmare of non-contextualization.
Costuming, I gave it a 4. And the reason I went that high was because it's still better than The Conqueror. In The Conqueror, the costuming is off by multiple centuries in many directions and geographic regions. But the costuming here is really only off by an uncertain number of years, between, say, 5 years too early and 20 years later. So relative to The Conqueror, it wasn't that off.
I gave it a 2. And that's me being real nice. I'm furious at this costuming. Either they didn't have the budget to address it or they didn't care. And either way, whatever the answer to that is, it's evidence that this film shouldn't exist. Because it's either they were being too lazy or they didn't have the money to make the context around the fashion. And you can't do that if it's a movie about a model in the fashion industry.
I think it's likelier to be lazy because 20 years out is one of the cheapest times to get the costuming right. That's when everything is going to be flowing into the thrift stores from people who finally got rid of that really nice dress that they've given up wearing it anymore, and they're tired of it having sentimental value at the back of the closet. So it's got to be laziness.
It's infuriating. Quality of the script. I gave it a 3, and again, being incredibly generous, because they did seem to get her words. And I think, as I said, like, there were accidentally a few really trenchant observations that were made. Fuck this movie, man.
I gave it a 5. I think that was nice of me. I was just thinking of where this fits in the overall 110 relative to other things we've seen. For accuracy, I gave it a 4. I appreciated that they recreated a few shoots that actually happened. I also had to think, I think that's about what I gave Caligula. I can't quite see how this would be less accurate than Caligula. So I gave it a 4.
Accuracy, I gave it a 3. Gia was a person who did exist. They did hit the major mile markers of her life. They did have that Cosmo shoot recreated. All the other elements, whether it's the needle drops, whether it's the costumes, whether it's the hair and makeup, there's nothing about it that presents as even remotely accurate in terms of telling this story.
For storytelling, I gave it a 4.
For storytelling, I gave it a 3. I do like this format when it's used really well, and I appreciate the effort. However, it didn't serve the narrative in any way in terms of driving the story forward or giving us more depth and color into characters who couldn't speak for themselves. It was just kind of there. Production value, I gave it 2.
I gave a 4. Wow. I'm being the nice one today.
This is very strange.
Production, direction, decision making. I have to be honest, I gave a 4 again.
I gave it a 2.
You gave it a what?
A 2. I feel like they looked at potential good decisions and then always chose the bad one.
And for Do We Care, I gave a 5. I didn't not care. I felt badly for her. I felt bad when Wilhelmina Cooper died. I was nicer than you on this one, and that's rather unusual.
I gave Do We Care a 2, and I want to qualify that 2 to say that is in the strictures and boundaries of the Gia that this film shows me.
Oh, wow. So my average came to 4.6.
2.8.
I'm doing the average. 3.7.
I just think like maybe it was a bad day for me to watch this and I was tired.
I'm just going to read you one line from this. This proves to all Team Aniston fans that acting talent and versatility more than make up for playing a mirror image of yourself on a popular television series. Go and see it, all caps.
What year was that written in?
5 January 2006.
Was after that, I was going to lose my mind over why are we comparing Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie still, but the wound was fresh and people were choosing sides.
I mean, I was on her side because I liked the idea that someone who's supposed to be dark and weird and kind of off steals the most sought-after man in arguably the world from this little America's Miss Sweetheart type.
I think that we were all looking to put blame on the wrong people here. Like, Brad Pitt's the one who was married.
Okay. So, on March 20th of 2013, officially Natalia wrote 10 out of 10, the most underrated, with the most underrated in all caps, the most underrated film of all time. This is by far the most underrated film of all time at my age. I'm 28. That is all I want to say. That is all I want to say. I really looked for this movie because of Angelina Jolie. After Girl Interrupted, I just had to see this. No one else could have played it better than Angie. People are complaining because of the story and the drug theme. They can't understand it's based on a true story. So that's what it is. Goodness. Underrated. ... Underrated. ... Underrated. All caps. Great performance by Jolie, as always.
I don't agree that this is the most underrated movie of all time. Off the top, I'm thinking of the Martin Short and Charles Grodin film, Clifford. Is a really underrated movie. This movie seems like it was appropriately rated for the time period. It won a lot of prizes. It's not Citizen Kane.
That's right. It did win a lot of prizes. It's very well respected.
Yeah. I'm interested in it being a problematic film because of the drug use. Again, like not unlike Rocket Man last week, like if you're coming to the table for a movie about Gia Carangi and the modeling industry in the late 70s and early 80s, you know there's going to be drugs. So anyone who was surprised and upset and scandalized by that, there's a lot of things that aren't for you.
I have another one for you, but did you have one that you wanted to read?
No.
Yeah, so one more display of enthusiasm here. Oh, there was one reviewer who said in 2002 she should have won an Oscar, apparently unaware that it's a made-for-TV movie. On May 9th of 2005, Moi, Valentin, titled their 10 out of 10 review simply Gia. This movie is the best movie I have ever seen. Angelina Jolie is my favorite actress, and Gia Marie Carangi is my ideal. Gia was the first of the supermodels born from the decadent disco era of the late 70s, early 80s. Gia was heroin addicted and had the most magnetic, supercharged beauty of her day. She had it all: fame, money, adoration, and a body to die for. She also had unresolved problems and personal demons, which she tried to suppress through drug use. Having seen this movie, I have read the book about the life of Gia Carangi. I love her. I love this emotional and smart movie. It is worth seeing. You will not regret. Fashion, love, emotions, drugs, sex, fast cars, AIDS, death. It all combined in this wonderful movie.
I like when they get to the part where they're like, fashion, drugs, AIDS. Everybody's favorite thing to have in a movie is for someone to die of AIDS. The fuck? Also, I like the part where they're talking about the decadent 70s coming to life. I used to work at a roller skating rink, and this place was their Studio 54 in this had as much disco as that roller skating rink.
Gosh, the tagline for this maybe should have been fashion, drugs, AIDS.
I mean, what's wrong with people?
I don't know. Do you want to try to pick a 10-star review?
Sure.
To make sense of it all?
Okay, I've got a short one by Dipin Kazander. Not gonna try. Angelina at her best. If Gia were alive to see this movie, then she would have definitely cried after watching it. Not for already depressed people, and I just can't explain how much reality is reflected in this movie. It's not as much popular as Lara Croft, but it is way better than that. ... 5 exclamation points.
Oh.
Gia were alive to see this movie. I'm going to do the math on this one for a long time. If Gia were alive to see this movie of her life, in which at the end of this movie she dies. What? I don't understand. How would such a thing be possible?
Okay, I have to give them this for outward appearances. They did a reasonable job of making Angelina Jolie look like shit at the end. I think that's why I gave it a 6.
Fair enough. I'm feeling a lot of guilt right now for being as angry at this movie as I was. I do think it's very bad, but also it's like that guilt of like, but what have you done with your life, Sarah? Have you made anything? Have you made any art? No, I haven't. Have I made any art that anyone should even bother critiquing? I haven't.
Wait, so do you want me to have someone photograph you naked against a chain link fence? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, not now, but maybe when I was 20. But I haven't even written a shitty film. Who gave me the right to criticize a movie that I don't like? What gives me the sense that that's acceptable? I feel really guilty about that. Because even bad art is art that got finished. What have I done?
We still rated Gia above Caligula. Caligula got 3.25. This got 3.7. Because I was being nice. Wow. Do you want to wrap it up?
I guess so. I feel like a bad person. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, tell plural friends, or share us on social media. We hear it helps.
Please tune in next week when we'll be celebrating America's birthday with our first film about America's pastime. That's right, we will be discussing Cobb, the 1994 biopic of Baseball Hall of Famer Ty Cobb, one of the most unpleasant sports ball players of all time. Think about it and remember that we called for a more perfect union, because nobody can rightly accuse the union or our sports ball players of currently being perfect. Sarah, has anyone yet coined the term Oscarbation to describe when an actor makes a self-indulgent biopic in their effort to get an Academy Award nomination?
I've never heard it. Let's claim it.
Oscarbation, everyone. We coined it here.
Gonna see some serious Oscarbation next week. With Cobb.
Oh, yeah. And with that, have a relatively enjoyable 7 days, or possibly better. It's about as much as we can hope for.
Indeed.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.